What if I told you that one of the most powerful institutions in the United States was created in secret, on a private island, by a small group of bankers and politicians who didn't want the public to know what they were doing?
No votes, no press, no public debate.
Yet today, this institution controls interest rates, influences inflation, affects your mortgage, your credit card, your job prospects, and even whether the economy booms or crashes. I'm talking about the Federal Reserve. Most Americans know the Fed exists. Few truly understand how it was born, who designed it, and why its origin stories still fuel suspicion, controversy, and conspiracy more than a century later. So here's the real question this video will answer. Was the Federal Reserve created to protect the American economy, or to protect the financial elite from the American people? To understand that, we need to go back, long before the Fed existed, to a time when money itself was the greatest political weapon in America. America before the Fed, a nation afraid of central banks. In the early days of the United States, the idea of a central bank was deeply unpopular. Why? Because Americans had already lived under one. The British banking system and the Bank of England was seen as a symbol of elite control, debt, and imperial power. Many of the founding fathers believed centralized finance was just another form of tyranny. Thomas Jefferson famously warned that banks were more dangerous than standing armies. Andrew Jackson later went to war, literally political war, against the Second Bank of the United States, calling it a monster that served the rich at the expense of ordinary citizens. By the mid-1800s, America had no central bank. And that created a new problem. Without a central authority, the U.S. financial system was chaotic. Thousands of private banks issued their own money. Bank runs were common. Panics happened regularly. In 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893. Each crisis followed the same pattern. Credit collapsed, businesses failed, workers lost jobs, and wealth concentrated upward. But the most important crisis, the one that would change everything, came in 1907. The Panic of 1907, the American financial system nearly collapsed. A failed stock market scheme triggered a chain reaction. Banks stopped trusting each other, depositors rushed to withdraw cash, markets froze. There was no Federal Reserve, no lender of last resort, no emergency backstop. So who stepped in? Not the government. J.P. Morgan. Yes, that Morgan. From his private library in New York, Morgan summoned the most powerful bankers in the country and personally coordinated a rescue of the system. He decided which banks lived, which failed, which companies received liquidity. And it worked. The crisis was stopped, but it exposed something deeply uncomfortable. Oh, America's financial stability depended on the goodwill of one private banker. For many in Washington, this was unacceptable. For bankers, it was terrifying. Both sides reached the same conclusion. This system couldn't continue like this. The secret meeting on Jekyll Island. In 1910, something extraordinary happened. 6 men boarded a private train in New Jersey. They used fake names. They avoided journalists. Even the train staff didn't know their true identities. Their destination, Jekyll Island, a secluded private resort off the coast of Georgia, owned by America's wealthiest families. Among them were representatives of J.P. Morgan interests, Rockefeller banking interests, Kuhn, Loeb & Co., the U.S. Treasury. Their mission? To design a new American banking system. In secret. Why the secrecy? Because central banking was still political poison. If the public knew bankers were drafting the plan, it would fail instantly. Over the course of several days, they drafted the blueprint for what would eventually become the Federal Reserve System. The irony? A system sold to the public as protection from Wall Street was largely designed by Wall Street. Selling the Federal Reserve to America. When the plan finally emerged, it wasn't called a central bank. That word was avoided at all costs. Instead, it was framed as decentralized, scientific, non-political, designed to stabilize the economy. In 1913, under President Woodrow Wilson, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, just days before Christmas, when many lawmakers had already left Washington. The timing was not accidental, and with that, the Federal Reserve was born. But here's where things get interesting. What is the Federal Reserve, really? Most people think the Federal Reserve is a government agency. It's not. Others think it's a private bank. That's also not quite true. The Fed is a hybrid system, deliberately designed to blur the line between public and private power. It consists of a board of governors in Washington, government-appointed, and 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, corporate entities owned by member banks.
Yes, member banks own shares in their regional Fed banks. No, they can't sell them. Yes, they receive dividends. And no, ordinary citizens have no ownership stake.
This unique structure creates a powerful illusion. The Fed appears independent, yet deeply embedded within the banking system it regulates. Supporters call this insulation from politics. Critics call it regulatory capture. The Fed's greatest power? Creating money. Here's the part most people don't fully understand. The Federal Reserve doesn't just print money. It creates money digitally by expanding bank reserves. When the Fed buys government bonds or other assets, it injects new money into the system. When it raises interest rates, it pulls money out. This power influences inflation, employment, asset prices, debt levels, currency value. In other words, the Fed doesn't just respond to the economy. It shapes the economy. The Great Depression, the Fed's first big failure. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the Federal Reserve failed catastrophically. Instead of providing liquidity, it tightened credit. Instead of stabilizing banks, it let thousands collapse. The result? The worst economic disaster in American history. Even Milton Friedman, one of the Fed's defenders, later admitted the Federal Reserve made the Great Depression far worse than it needed to be. The lesson the Fed learned wasn't humility. It was this: never allow the system to collapse again, no matter the cost. From gold to paper, the ultimate shift. Originally, U.S. dollars were tied to gold. That changed permanently in 1971. President Richard Nixon closed the gold window, ending the dollar's convertibility into gold. From that moment on, the U.S. dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed not by metal, but by trust and power. This gave the Federal Reserve unprecedented freedom. Money creation was no longer limited by gold reserves. Debt could expand indefinitely, and the consequences are still unfolding today. 2008, when the Fed chose winners. The 2008 financial crisis revealed the Fed's modern role more clearly than any event before it. When Wall Street collapsed under the weight of bad debt, the Federal Reserve stepped in with trillions of dollars in emergency programs. Banks were rescued. Financial institutions survived. Asset prices recovered. But millions of Americans lost homes, jobs, and savings. To critics, this confirmed their worst fears. The Fed exists to save the system, not the people inside it. To supporters, the alternative was total collapse. Both may be true. The pandemic era, unlimited intervention. Then came 2020. In response to COVID-19, the Federal Reserve unleashed interventions on a scale never seen before. Interest rates went to zero. Money supply exploded. Assets, from stocks to real estate, soared. At first, it looked like success. Then came inflation. Suddenly, everyday Americans paid the price at grocery stores, gas stations, and rent payments. Once again, the Fed raised rates aggressively. Boom, then bust. Stability, then pain. The cycle continued. So, what is the real secret history of the Federal Reserve?
It's not that it's evil. It's not that it's benevolent.
It's that it was designed to manage crises, not eliminate them.
From its secret birth on Jekyll Island to its modern dominance over global finance, the Federal Reserve has always existed to protect the financial system itself.
Sometimes that aligns with the public good. Sometimes it doesn't.
Understanding the Fed means understanding a hard truth about modern capitalism. Money is not neutral.
And those who control it shape history.
Once you see that, you never look at interest rates, inflation, or economic news the same way again. If this video changed the way you see the Federal Reserve, even a little, then make sure to like this video so more people can discover it.
Subscribe to Finanza Storica for deep dives into the hidden history of money, power, and finance that textbooks don't teach. And most importantly, comment below. Do you think the Federal Reserve protects the economy or the elite? Your perspective matters. Until next time, this is Finanza Storica, where history explains the money behind the world.